So you're in for a treat today. I found 3 of the scariest wood stories that I could possibly find on the internet. If you're new here, I deliver the scariest stories that you've ever heard multiple times a week. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, go ahead and subscribe for me so you never miss a story. And of course, hit that notification bell. And if you've never liked a YouTube video in your entire life, let today be the first time. Enjoy the show. So this first story follows a boyfriend and a girlfriend that always went on camping trips together. Not necessarily camping, but they would go on day trips to local campsites and they would spend the day there. They enjoyed just getting away from everything, putting their phones away, and enjoying the nature together. There was this one campsite that had this really beautiful lake that was only about 30 minutes away from their house. So this one weekend, they pack up the car, they're gonna head over there, they're gonna have a picnic by the lake, and just enjoy each other for the entire day. They were in a new relationship, so they were definitely in the puppy love phase, and they would constantly do little things to surprise each other, and it was just an exciting part of their relationship. You know when you first start dating somebody and you just want to go that extra mile to add some excitement into your relationship? That's where they're at. So when they pull up, they just pull into the parking lot and the boyfriend is going to start unpacking the car, and the girlfriend just said, "I'm going to head by the lake and I have a surprise for you when you get there." They didn't bring too much stuff, so it wasn't an overwhelming unpack for the boyfriend, so he's like, "Okay, I'm in for this surprise. This sounds fun." And they planned on going swimming together, but a little bit after they ate. But the girlfriend had a fun little surprise for him. Her surprise was that she was going to go skinny dipping, and when he arrived at the lake, his beautiful girlfriend was going to be declothed and already swimming in the lake waiting for him. So she runs up to the lake and he's still by the car, and when she gets up there, she does her whole thing. She declothes, she puts her hair up into a bun, and she jumps into the lake to wait for her boyfriend. This lake wasn't massive. It wasn't like Lake Michigan or Lake Geneva. It was just your local lake. It was pretty big, but you could see all the edges of it. If you really wanted to, you could probably swim all the way across, but it would be a pretty difficult swim. The lake also only had one entry point. It just had this opening that was like a nice little kind of makeshift beach, but then all of the other edges were surrounded by trees. You couldn't exit the lake at any other point but this entrance spot, unless you swam all the way across and there was another little beach over there, but there wasn't an entrance. It would just go straight into the woods. So if nobody was on the beach, you knew that nobody was actually around and you could get away with a little bit of mischievous things with you and your partner. So when she got up to the beach and she saw that nobody was there, she had the green light to surprise her boyfriend. She got in there, and this lake actually gets pretty deep pretty quickly. It's not like those beaches where you could walk in for a while and you're at ankle, then knee, then hip. Once you're in, it has a pretty large drop and you're treading water only about 15 feet in. So she's in there just splashing around for a couple minutes, waiting for her boyfriend to arrive, really excited. She's anticipating this romantic moment with her boyfriend arriving, seeing all of her clothes on the floor, and him just jumping in, and they're gonna have this great moment together. She's treading water for about 3 minutes now, and she's dunking her head under the water and just hoping her boyfriend is as excited as she thinks he's gonna be. And then after a few minutes pass, she dunks her head under, and then when she pulls her head out, she sees a man at the edge of the lake, and she's like, "Oh, my boyfriend's here." But she wipes her eyes because water's running from her hair, and when she clears her eyes and she looks closer, it's not her boyfriend. She's immediately very embarrassed and a little bit scared because she's in the water completely naked, so she has to wait for her boyfriend to maybe bring her clothes in, and the whole moment's kind of ruined. But the moment gets even worse when she notices that this guy is standing right next to her clothes and looking directly at her. She gets a better look, and this guy is an older gentleman, a little bit drawn out. He's not particularly dirty, but he's not particularly clean. His clothes aren't super unusual, but they're definitely not camping gear, but he just has like a little smirk on his face. The smirk is telling her that he knows what she's doing and he's kind of enjoying watching in kind of a creepy way. So she's just looking at this guy, hoping her boyfriend is going to come up this hill any second to ease the tension of this moment. But she doesn't see him, and this guy speaks up, and his voice doesn't really match his body. He's a little bit grungy, but his voice is very calm and polite and almost classy and elegant, like he speaks like an old English person. And he just says something along the lines of, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you out here all by yourself?" She doesn't answer because she doesn't really want to give this guy any information, and she's already uncomfortable because she doesn't have any clothes on. And he follows up and he looks down at her clothes and looks back at her and he goes, "Ma'am, are you skinny dipping?" in almost a flirtatious manner, like he just came across this fun moment that he gets to be a part of, a moment that her boyfriend was supposed to experience, not this odd grungy man. She's not really replying yet. She's just kind of shooting out one-word answers, trying to get this guy to go away, and she's staying deep in the water so he can't see any of her, but she has to tread because she doesn't want him to see anything, so she has to stay in deep enough water. But she calls out to this guy, "Actually, my boyfriend's here, so maybe you should go." But this guy's smirk gets a little bit bigger and he replies, "That's if your boyfriend didn't leave you here for me." She doesn't like the sound of that whatsoever. He's not backing off with his flirtiness. He's giving her very uncomfortable energy, and to do that at a campsite with nobody around to a girl that's alone, it's just very unsettling and tone deaf. So she kind of wants to scare the guy a little bit, be a little bit more aggressive, aggressive, not let him feel like he's in control of the situation. And she just kind of starts threatening him a little bit, saying, you probably shouldn't be here when my boyfriend gets up here. He's very protective. He probably won't like seeing me like this. So you should probably go. And now she's struggling a little bit because she's treading water, trying to enunciate herself so this guy on shore could hear her. But this guy's smile just keeps getting bigger, and he replies in a much less polite tone. Haha, I killed him and I stuffed him in the trunk. She doesn't know if she heard him properly, but she knows what she just heard. And this guy seems really excited about saying that to her, and he said it in a very odd fashion. So she's starting to panic a little bit because treading water is getting harder and harder. And this guy just said, I killed him and put him in your trunk. So now he's not just tone deaf and unsettling, now he's threatening and saying bizarre things to her. She doesn't even know how to reply to this because is he lying? Like what is happening? And then he follows up and he starts egging her on, saying, you should come to shore and come get your clothes. You probably shouldn't be in the lake without your clothes on. Just like egging her on and harassing her and threatening her, saying he did horrible things to her boyfriend. Now she's panicking. She has no idea what to do, so she just starts yelling for help just in case her boyfriend is still at the car. Or he's on his way, so he should hurry up. And thank goodness the boyfriend starts running up the trail. She sees him, she gets a moment of relief. And the boyfriend is a pretty big dude. He's an athletic guy, and yes, he is very protective and borderline aggressive about the safety of his new girlfriend, so he starts confronting the dude. They're both on shore, and she's still about 15-20 feet away from shore, but she sees her boyfriend going towards this man. But the man is just standing there smiling, completely unfazed by this boyfriend's large stature and aggressive nature, and he's just standing there with this eerie little freaky smile on his face. And the boyfriend throws out a few threats, but he's just unfazed. He's just standing there, and then the boyfriend stands there for a second and stops talking to maybe get a reaction out of this guy. Like, what is this guy gonna say to me? And right at that moment, the man just turns towards the lake and like swan dives into the water. And he's just swimming directly towards the girl. So now this becomes this situation of this boyfriend has to catch up to this guy before he gets to his girlfriend who's treading water. So the boyfriend starts running into the lake, but this man is swimming incredibly fast. Way faster than it seemed like he was physically capable of. And mind you, this man isn't doggy paddling. He's not doing the little swim like this. He's not doing a breaststroke. He's not doing a front stroke. He's doing a butterfly stroke. Like he's coming out of the water like he's a dolphin. And every 3 feet, his arms just come out of the water and he's doing it in incredible form, incredibly fast, and he's just closing in on this girl. The boyfriend's trying to catch up, but he's not necessarily a strong swimmer. And the girlfriend doesn't really know what to do because she wants to get to shore to her boyfriend, but this man is directly in between her and the shore. So the only thing that she can do is start drifting off to the left to try to circle towards the shore. So she's kind of fading to the left and fading towards the shore. And as she's fading, this man isn't changing course towards her. He's just continuously going straight. So she's faded out of his route of his odd butterfly stroke. And he just keeps going straight. And he's getting closer and closer, and the boyfriend is not catching up until she's side by side with this guy. And mid butterfly stroke, she's looking really close at him because she's freaking out. And while this guy is in mid-stroke, she could see that he's looking directly at her with a big smile on his face. It doesn't look like he's focusing on breathing or focusing on swimming. He's just effortlessly doing this butterfly stroke and staring at her as he passes her. And she gets one good look at his face while he's mid-stroke, and he has this weird smile, and he has like cat-like eyes, like kind of yellow on the outside and slits in the middle, and then just keeps going. She's relieved for a second because he's just continuing to swim and she's fading towards shore, and she looks away from him to just focus on getting to shore. And once he's past her, the boyfriend stops trying to follow him because why would he follow this guy into deep water when he's not actively pursuing his girlfriend anymore? So they both start swimming towards shore and they don't look at him for a couple seconds. They both get out of the water and start crawling up onto the beach, and she's reclothing and he's trying to cover her. And once she's fully covered, they both look back to see where he's at, to see if he's turned around, if he's coming towards shore. But this guy is just continuously butterfly stroke through the lake, straight, exactly how he was going before. And he has not broken stride one time. He hasn't slowed down. He has not stopped. He's just hitting this effortless butterfly stroke all the way to the middle of the lake. The boyfriend starts drying off his girlfriend, checking in on her, trying to make sure that she's okay, and they're not looking at him for a split second. But now he's far enough away so they feel pretty comfortable just being on the beach because it would take him a little while to get back to shore. So they're just standing there looking at this guy. And at this point, he's stopped swimming and he's just in the middle of the lake, 100 feet further than she was. But he stopped swimming and he's just floating in the middle of the lake with only his head out of the water. It doesn't even look like he's treading. There's no water disturbance around his body. His head is just floating in the middle of this lake with that same weird smile on his face. And they're just having this standoff with this guy. He's fully in the lake, so the boyfriend can't get to them. They feel safe enough on the beach, and they're just staring at him for like a full minute. And then finally this guy speaks up, and he just calls out in his same polite, weird voice. He just says, "Come on in, the water's fine." They did not go in. They immediately went to their car and went home. So this story follows a husband, a wife, and 2 kids that would go camping very consistently with each other. They would frequent the Michigan national parks, and they would always like to spend weekends together in nature. The husband just liked taking his sons out into these isolated areas just to give them the experience that he had growing up. Him and his father would always go camping, and he was very used to the outdoors. And he felt pretty comfortable taking his family to isolated areas because he was confident that he could take care of them and protect them and show them the ropes. He would never go to super isolated areas because his kids weren't old enough. But this time they were going to an area that was more isolated than any place they've ever been before. He took them to Isle National Park, which is located in Michigan, but it's like a little island off the coast of Michigan, so it's not connected to the mainland. This is a beautiful national park, and the island has a lot of bears and mooses, so it's definitely a little bit of a higher risk area, but he just wanted to show them this place because he thought it was so beautiful, and they had the whole weekend to enjoy their trip together. This island actually happens to be a carless island, so you just take the boat, and once you get off, you have to hike to your campsite and set up camp, and it just adds to that isolated camping feel because there's no vehicles on the island. And because there was no vehicles, he wasn't planning on taking his kids too far out. It's not a massive island, but it's definitely not small. He only wanted to hike about 2 miles into the wilderness, so it would be an easy hike in and out. So they get on this boat, they get to the island, but as he's getting off, he notices the captain's looking at him a little bit weird. So he just stands there and kind of waits to see what the captain is going to say. And the captain just gives him like this little, almost warning, but it was like an obvious warning. It was of course somebody would say that, but why did you feel the need to say that? Because obviously that is my top priority. And the captain just said, "Be weary of the children." And the husband's like, "Yeah, of course I'm going to be weary of my children. We go camping all the time. My first priority is my family's safety. We're not going out that far. I have a plan." And he didn't know why the captain felt like it was necessary to tell him that, but he's just like, okay, I guess he's looking out for the kids. Maybe he doesn't like the idea of young kids like this going out on camping trips, whatever. He just kind of brushed it off, kind of felt like it was an attack on his parenting, but he's like, all right, dude, like, yeah, I'll see you in a few days. So they hike that 2 miles out to their campsite, and they spend the entire day setting up their campsite and just enjoying the scenery. Like I said, this is a pretty isolated, remote area, so they didn't see anybody while they were out there. It's not a super common campsite, and I guess this time of year there just wasn't a lot of traffic there, so he didn't see any other parents or any other kids there, but that's kind of what he wanted. He wanted that isolation feel. So for him, it was kind of a plus. He wasn't really worried about it. So the day goes on, they're having a good time, they're enjoying their campsite, they're just spending quality time together. When night comes around, they have dinner and they're settling into their campsite. They're ready to hit the hay pretty soon. The husband and the wife are just enjoying the fire, and his kids are in their tent giggling, and he's letting his kids wind down. He's not forcing them to go to sleep quite yet. He just has them in the tent so they'll start kind of getting ready for bedtime. Eventually the husband and the wife want quiet alone time, and they want to enjoy the scenery to themselves, and they tell their kids, let's start being quiet, let's actually hit the hay, guys. And the kids oblige. They stop giggling, they stop talking, and the sun's going down, so they're pretty confident that their kids fell asleep at this point. So the husband and the wife are having talks. They're just talking about their home life, how they met each other, getting that spark back in their relationship. And it's been about an hour since the kids made any noise, so they're confident they fell asleep. But then they start to hear children giggle. They start to hear their kids giggling and talking again. And he gets a little bit annoyed because he's like, you guys are going to ruin tomorrow. You guys aren't going to be well rested for tomorrow. You're going to ruin your trip if you mess up your sleep schedule on the first night. So he gets frustrated. He kind of goes into dad mode. But then he gets this weird feeling because he thinks he's hearing it wrong. His kids are in the tent to his right, but he's hearing the giggling from his left. But then he gets extra upset because it's well past midnight at this point, and he thinks his kids snuck out of their tent and are running around the campsite, and he's getting ready to scold them. But he checks on his kids, and they're laying in their bed, and the giggling stops, and he's like, oh, that was a little bit weird. Maybe other campers came to the campsite at this point, and they were just running around. Hopefully those parents get their kids in the tent pretty soon, and they could sleep soundly. It fades for about 10 minutes, and the husband and the wife just called it a night, and they go lay down. But then just like 30-40 minutes later, he starts hearing the giggling, and he's like, what is that? He's half mad because it just woke him up, but he's like, it's coming from the left again. It's definitely not my kids. They're in their tent. They're sound asleep when I check. But he's not positive, so he goes into dad mode. He gets gets aggressive again because he thinks he's gonna have to scold his kids or have to tell somebody else's kids to get off his campsite because they're gonna wake up his kid. So he aggressively unzips the tent, and he sees 3 children crouched down, digging a hole about 10 feet away from his tent in the middle of his campsite. And initially he thinks he's seeing double, he thinks he's too drowsy, so he like rubs his eyes a little bit because he's seeing 3 kids instead of the 2 that he brought. But then he realizes, oh no, it's 3 kids. There's 3 kids here. So he just starts barking at him because he thinks some other parents are being really irresponsible letting their kids run around this late. But right as he starts talking, all 3 of the kids just swing their heads at him and just start staring at him, and they're still giggling. They have this really lively giggle. He thought that 2 of them had to be his kids, and maybe one other kid from the other camp had coerced them to come out of the tent and play with them. But he realized very quickly, these are not my children. Whose children are these? He was being pretty aggressive, and he only got a glimpse of them for a second because after they looked at him and stared at him for a second, they just got up and started running towards the tree line. Something about that felt very off to him because even though it was dark, there was a little glow from the fire, and when he got a look at their face, they didn't have childlike features. They almost had mature features. They were child-sized. They looked like they were 5 to 7 years old, but their faces were matured and a little bit odd, but their voices and their giggles were very childlike. But he only got a brief look at them, just for like 2 to 3 seconds before they took off. He felt a little bit uneasy about this, but they weren't violent or mischievous. They were just kind of giggling, looked like they were messing around. They were just digging a hole. Maybe they were doing a prank, but he did feel a little uneasy about it. But what is he gonna do? Chase these kids back into the forest? He just laid back down and tried to go back to sleep. But after about another 45 minutes, he just started dozing off, and he hears the giggling picking up again, and he's like, no way these kids are back. No way somebody's parents are being this irresponsible and this obnoxious to let their kids keep coming into my camp. So at this point, he's not just aggressive, he's borderline angry. He whips the tent open again, and he starts crawling out because he wants to maybe get a hold of these kids, question them about where they're coming from. But as he's crawling out of the tent, he sees the kids look at him again, and right when he looks up, right when he picks his head up from crawling, all 3 of them throw a handful of dirt in his face and in his eyes. They had handfuls of dirt because they were digging in that same hole again. And by the time he gets the dirt out of his eyes, all he sees is the last few seconds of them running back into the forest, and he just hears them laughing as they're sprinting. But this time he didn't get another good look at their faces. He saw the way that they were running. He said it was so odd because they weren't running like children. His 2 sons were 7 and 9 years old, and they were still clumsy like baby deer. And these kids that he saw were half the size of them. They must have been 4 or 5 years old, but they were running in a very athletic, mature manner. They weren't clumsy whatsoever. They had a good form while they were sprinting. He was so aggressive this time that his wife woke up too, and she comes out of the tent and she's like, what's going on? He's like, these kids keep coming into our camp. They just threw dirt in my face. We should stay up for a few hours so they don't come back, so they don't wake up the kids, so they don't ruin tomorrow for us. And they're talking and bickering about these other irresponsible parents, how obnoxious it is that they're just letting their kids run around. And while they're sitting by their campfire, they still hear these giggles kind of circling their camp, and they're just so annoyed with it at this point. Even though the husband has this little eerie feeling, like he didn't like the way these kids look, there was odd features about them, the way they were running was a little bit weird, but whatever, maybe they're just more athletically adept than his children, because they were just children, who cares? He's not gonna freak out his wife by giving her these other details when it was just kids digging a hole in their camp. They weren't stealing anything, but they thought, we should stay up for an hour so they don't come back. We'll just wait them out so they don't feel comfortable coming back to our camp. Or if they come back, we could politely ask them to stop coming back, or where their parents are so we could talk to them so their parents will scold them. And eventually the giggling dies down, and they're like, okay, it's been a little bit over an hour. I think it's time for us to go to sleep. So they get back in their tents, and this time they put in earplugs because they don't really care if the kids come back and dig a hole. The wife's just like, let's get some sleep so we could have a good day tomorrow. Let's not let these irresponsible parents ruin our trip, you know? So they throw earplugs in and they have a good night's sleep. Morning comes around and the father's the first one up right when the sun's coming up, and he gets up to leave the tent because he wants to brew a cup of coffee for his wife and maybe start on breakfast for his kids. Just make the trip memorable, you know? Be a sweet husband. He unzips his tent expecting to feel that camping sunlight, like that sunlight that only comes out at dawn at a campsite, and he just wants to feel that sunlight on his face. But when he opens his tent, he's only hit by shade, and he's like, what is shading the sunlight? I want that nice nature sunlight. And there's just a little glare of sunlight coming around a silhouette that's about 10 feet in front of his campsite. And as he's picking his head up, he sees the base of it first, and something sticking out of a mound of dirt directly where those children were digging. And it just looks like a pole. But as he's scanning and he's going higher and higher, he notices that this thing is like a full wooden post jammed into that hole, and the top of it is pointed into a spike, and it's just this weird protruding tall wooden spike about 6 feet high. And as his eyes adapt to the sun sunlight and he actually gets a really good look at what is actually casting this shade on his face. He could see that it is a full-grown deer impaled on this spike right in the middle like it's a skewered chicken, and it's just completely blocking out the sun. And it all hits him at once. He's like, they came back to this campsite, they finished digging this hole, they were able to get this full wooden spike into the ground, and then they impaled full deer on it. So he's thinking these weird parents, this weird family is all in on this because children couldn't do this. This is a large wooden spike with a full-grown deer impaled on this spike. This couldn't have been done by children. So he's freaking out at this point. He doesn't want to wake anybody up, and he's just inspecting this impaled animal with this large spike on his campsite, and he notices a small piece of paper right on the base of it. Before he picks it up, his mind is just spinning. He's thinking, were the parents aware that their kids were messing with us? Are they hunters? Did they think that this was like a kind gesture, like almost an apology, like, hey, I know our kids kept you up all night, here's some meat. He doesn't even know what to think of this. But then he picks up the piece of paper, and on this paper, it was written in crayon, as if the children wrote it in crayon. And the note just read, "Sorry for waking you." So then he thinks even further. He's like, was this a gift? Like, did the parents do this and make the kids write it to apologize to us about harassing us all night? And the father is just standing next to this lifeless deer impaled on this post, and he's just inspecting this note. But then he realizes something odd about it. This piece of paper is incredibly familiar to him, and he gets a sharp sense of dread as he turns it over. And he sees on the other side of this note, it's a full journal entry, and it's in his handwriting. And he realizes at this moment, this is a page ripped from my journal that I wrote yesterday after we arrived. And it gets even worse because he knows that his journal is in his backpack inside of his tent where he was sleeping. So whoever did this unzipped his tent while he had his ears plugged, reached into his backpack, took his journal out, and ripped out a piece of paper before leaving. He's absolutely freaking out at this point. So he immediately starts shaking this pole to pull it down because he doesn't want his kids or his wife to see this. So he's just shaking it, and it's in there so deep. They must have dug like 3 feet to get this spike to actually stand upright. But he's just shaking at it for like 10 minutes until he finally gets it to tip over. And then this full-grown man who's used to hiking, who's used to campsites, is having a really hard time dragging this 200+ pound animal off of his campsite into the tree line just to protect his children from seeing it. Once he has it into the tree line, he hears faint giggles in the distance, and he just starts getting more and more freaked out, and he hustles back to his camp, and he just wakes up his wife, and he's like, we need to go right now. I will explain it to you in the car. We need to start packing immediately. So they break down their campsite, they put out their fire, they walk the 2 miles back to where the ferry dropped them off initially, and he's hearing faint giggles the entire way. But he didn't tell his wife about the animal. His kids didn't even know this happened, so they're not even thinking anything of these giggles. They just think there's other people in the area having a good time, but he knows the severity of those giggles that he's hearing, and he's just trying to get his family to pick up the pace, and they finally got to where the ferry dropped him off, and the same captain is there manning this boat, and he's just looking at the captain, and the captain's looking at him really, really weird, and he starts thinking of that line that the captain told him, "Be weary of the children," and that line starts hitting heavier and heavier. But he doesn't know how to confront this guy. It's almost like this guy had this secret that he was just trying to warn him. But the captain did warn him, so he had a little bit of respect for him, and he had this moment of connection with him, like, you know what I just experienced. But he didn't feel like he had to say anything, so they load up their stuff onto the boat, and they just take the first ferry in the morning back home. So this next story follows this 22-year-old college graduate. She was an experienced hiker and backpacker, and she had just graduated college, so she planned this whole extravagant trip to go hiking the Appalachian Trail. It was about a 45-mile hike, but she felt like she was prepared to do it, and she wanted to spend some time alone to try to figure out her next moves. She had just graduated, and she didn't know what she wanted to do with her life, so she just thought, let me get out into nature for a little while, let me be alone with my thoughts, and let me figure this out. She had planned on doing the first week of the hike by herself, and then halfway through, she was going to meet up with a friend at a rest point, and they were going to finish their hike together, but she would have a nice 7 days to herself. She had been planning to be out there for a few weeks, and she let her parents know, she let everybody in her life know that she was going to be gone, and her parents weren't too worried because she'd done trips like this in the past. So this woman starts her adventure on this Appalachian Trail, and she's just getting into it, and she's enjoying herself initially. Some people say that hiking could be meditative and you have time with your own thoughts and you could just figure stuff out, and the weather was so beautiful and the Appalachian Trail is gorgeous, so she's just having a really good time her first few days. But that first 7-day stretch, You don't really see anybody else. She's in a very remote area. The first few days were perfect. She wasn't getting too tired. She had enough food. She was just having a really good time. And whenever she had to camp out for the night, she would just go about 30 feet off the trail so nobody would walk over her campsite. She didn't want to block the trail. But on the third day when she woke up, she could feel that something in the air was off. She didn't know if a storm was coming or if there was a predator around. She didn't know what it was. She just knew that something was wrong. She isn't sure if it's anxiety creeping in. She doesn't know if she's thinking too deeply about her life. She doesn't know if she forgot something or if she's doing something wrong. She doesn't know what is wrong. She can't put a finger on it. So she just decides, what's the best thing to do when something's wrong? Keep yourself busy. Let's start packing up the camp. Let's just get moving. Let's get a sweat going. Let's get this hike going. And hopefully an hour from now, I'll feel better about this. But as she's busy picking up her campsite, she can't help but to keep looking up and peeking around the tree line around her. She still feels this weird sense of anxiousness, of sadness, of dread. So she just keeps her head on a swivel. She just doesn't know what's wrong. And then she finishes packing up her backpack and she looks up into the tree line and she swears that she sees a man in the woods looking directly at her, but off in the distance, so she can't see his facial features or anything like that. She just knows that she saw a figure of a man. And mind you, she's in the middle of nowhere, so when you see somebody, usually people are very kind and greet each other to make sure they feel comfortable, but this guy wasn't trying to do this. He was just standing in the trees looking. And she looks down, then looks back up, and it looks like he just hid behind a tree, like he was trying to hide himself from her. It's not super uncommon to see people on the Appalachian Trail. A lot of people hike it, but it is unusual to try to hide yourself from somebody else. It just feels a little stalkerish. And she's just standing there frozen in her campsite because she knows she saw somebody, but then he hid himself and now he's nowhere to be found. And she's hoping she sees him and it's just nothing, it's just another hiker, it's all good. But she doesn't see him again. So she's still just stuck there. She doesn't feel confident enough to announce to this guy that she had seen him because there's nobody here. It feels a little bit odd and confrontational. But now she just feels like somebody's in these tree lines watching me and she's just getting more and more scared. And then these bad thoughts just keep snowballing. They just keep piling up on her. She starts to think like, did I sense this guy? Was I able to feel that he was watching me? And I still feel like he's watching me. So is he still watching me? Not to mention, she's a young woman. She's in the middle of nowhere. So she starts freaking out. She's like, I need to pack up my stuff and I need to go. I don't want to be around this guy. I don't feel comfortable at this campsite anymore. I'm going to try to start my hike and get as far away from this guy as possible. So she gets off of her campsite. She gets back on the trail and she continues walking for a couple minutes and she just keeps looking over her shoulder, but she still feels like somebody's there. Even though she's away from the campsite, it's been over 20 minutes. She still has this sense that somebody's watching her. And again, the thoughts start snowballing and she starts walking faster and she just wants to get away from this area as fast as she can. So she eventually convinces herself that she needs to start jogging. She hasn't seen this guy again, but she feels like she just has to get away from whoever this guy was. The feeling gets so intense that she thinks that she has to figure something out. She can't just keep following this trail. This trail is miles away from any rest point, any other people. She feels so unsafe with this guy in her vicinity that she feels like her best chance to get away from this guy is to actually get off of the trail and try to get to the nearest street. Not the next rest point, not the next rendezvous point, not continuing on this trail. She thinks she needs to go off trail and get to a street because she's so worried about this guy following her. So she actually decides to take a shortcut through the woods down a hill to try to get to this road that's running parallel to the trail that she's on, which goes against the first thing that they teach you in camping and hiking and all of that. Do not go off trail. She decides her best case scenario is to try to get to that street and she turns off trail. And she doesn't just start a slow hike through this shortcut. She's running down this hill. She wants to get away from him as fast as possible. And now her energy's being drained. She's going downhill. She's off trail. This is a really rugged hike, but she's so positive that this guy was weird and whatever she saw and the feelings that she was getting, it was worth taking that risk to run downhill in the Appalachian Mountains instead of continuing on her trail, because she couldn't stand the thought of not making it to the next rest point by the next night and the idea of having to camp out in the middle of nowhere again. She thought, it's worth this risk. I'm running down this trail. Let's go. And now that she's into the woodsy area, she's not seeing him, but she's hearing him. She's hearing these grunts. She's hearing branches snap. She's hearing these audible sounds that they're just deep and they sound manly. She obviously couldn't keep up the pace of running, so eventually she starts slowing down and she just tries to tune into her hearing so she could hear anything that's around her. And she hears footsteps and she hears these grunts and it just won't stop and it keeps getting closer to her. And she's absolutely panicking at this point. The mixture of seeing that man and hearing him following her and running until she couldn't run anymore. She's just in the middle of nowhere, hiking for miles, and she just can't find this street. She had been going down this hill all day, and now the sun's going down and she's having this realization, now I have to camp off trail in the middle of these woods, and I hear this guy getting closer and closer to me. But she has to set up camp here. She can't keep going. It's completely dark. She's going to be completely lost if she doesn't stop and set up camp and only hike during the day. So she has to set up her camp, and she knows this guy is closing in on her. So she sets up her tent and she just crawls in, and she's just laying there praying that she doesn't hear any sounds, that nobody shows up, and starts standing over her tent. But as she's laying there, within the first hour, she starts to hear those sounds, and they're getting closer. She hears those grunts. She hears those deep tones that just sounds like a masculine voice. She hears sounds. She hears footsteps, and she's just laying there freaking out in the middle of nowhere. And throughout the entire night, she continues hearing these sounds getting closer, and throughout the night, these footsteps are just circling her campsite. They never pull up right to her tent, but she could hear them just circling her all night. She just has to lay in this tent all night, hoping this guy doesn't try to open her tent or try to assault her or anything like that. And the second the sun comes up, she hasn't gotten a wink of sleep. She's been up all night. She jumps out of her tent, she packs it all up, and she starts sprinting in the same direction that she was sprinting last night. And again, that entire day, it's the same as the day before. She hears the sounds, she hears the footsteps, she's looking over her shoulder every 2 minutes. She never gets another glance at this guy, but she continues to hear him. And again, just like the night before, she doesn't find the road, she doesn't find a rest point, she doesn't see anybody else for the rest of the day. The sun's going down, it's about to be nighttime again, and she has to camp again. And she knows she's lost. She wants to go back to the trail at this point because she's like, I'm in the middle of nowhere. I think I'm lost. I don't know if I took a left or a right, but she can't turn around because she only hears the sounds from behind her. If she turns around, she's going to eventually run into this guy, and that's the last thing that she wants to do. So she's forced to set up her tent again and go through an entire night of hearing footsteps again. She's not sleeping. This is the second night. She hears the same grunts, the same footsteps, and she's stuck in the middle of this Appalachian wilderness, hearing this man stalking her throughout the second night. But since it was the second night and he didn't approach her tent the night before, she gets so exhausted that she actually manages to fall asleep while she's hearing this stuff around her tent. But the next morning, right when she wakes up, her senses immediately go right back to anxiety, right back to fear, and she jumps out of her tent, tries to pack it up again because she's like, I need to keep going. I need to get away from this, whoever this stalker is. And again, for the second morning in a row, she packs her stuff as fast as she can, and she starts her morning off with a run through the woods in the same direction that she was going before. She's lost in the woods for 7 days at this point, and the friend that she was supposed to meet up with at the 7-day mark shows up to the rendezvous point, and her friend's not there and she doesn't know what to do. So her friend immediately contacts the authorities, the police, the rangers, whoever it was, and says, my friend was supposed to meet me here. You guys need to look for her. I'm filing a missing persons report right now. And naturally, the authorities take this very seriously. They hate to hear when a woman goes missing on the trail by herself, so they launch a massive search. Tons of people looking for this girl. 14 days they're searching for this girl on the Appalachian Trail. They have hundreds of people, they have helicopters, they have dogs trying to pick up scents, and they don't find this girl anywhere. So finally, after 2 full weeks of looking for this girl, they have to stop looking for her. They have to assume she's gone. But 2 days after they called the search off, total of 23 days since this girl had started her hike, a random hunter found her while he was out on his hunt. He just finds this girl slumped against a tree, totally dehydrated, totally emaciated, and he obviously starts tending to her, but she's initially very scared of him. She initially thinks this is the guy that has been stalking, but eventually he talks her down. He's like, babe, I just found you. I'm just trying to help you. Let me help you. He finally gets her to come around and trust her, and he helps her out of the Appalachian Mountains and brings her directly to the hospital, and she gets IVs, she gets fed. She was completely delirious when he found her, but they nursed her back to health before she could start talking to them about what happened. And this girl said that she had been chased not only for those first few days, but for the entire time she was out there. The first full week, the 2 weeks that they were looking for, the full 23 days, whoever she saw at her campsite had been stalking her that entire time. She went on to say that a few weeks into this process, whoever this stalker was had gotten so close to her that she decided to drop her backpack, drop her water, drop all of her supplies, and just sprint through the wilderness completely bareback. Any chance she had to survive was in that backpack. Any chance she had to survive was in that water, and she felt like it was too heavy for her to continue to run away from this guy, so she just abandoned it to get away from this man. And I feel like that really shows just how scared and serious she was about the situation. Because going off trail is one thing, being nervous is another thing, but being willing to drop all of your survival equipment just so you could run faster away from somebody, to me that shows that she was 100% positive and coherent, knowing that somebody was stalking her. And she told them that the only reason she survived after she dropped her pack was because a few days after she had dropped everything, she came across a little care package that was just stuffed in a trunk of a tree. And this is common. Sometimes people that hunt in areas pretty consistently know the area well, so they'll like tuck food away so they know it's out there for their next hunt. And she found this little basket of pound cake and treats and just bread that was able to sustain her for the last few days before that hunter had found her. And to this day, this woman has no idea how to express what happened to her. She just knew that she saw somebody. This person stalked them for weeks, but never touched them. She never saw them again. And the police didn't know what to do about it because she had no description. She was just like, it was a guy that I saw and he kept following me. So nobody really knew what to do about this. Some people thought she just had a psychotic break and worked herself up, and she just made herself so nervous, and once she had gotten lost, it just snowballed and she freaked herself out and she got herself lost. But other people, including the park rangers, kind of think it might have been a feral person, which is very common in folklore around the Appalachian area. They're said to stalk people and harass them when they're in their area where they live. But to this day, there's no official report about what actually happened to her. Nobody was found, the man wasn't found, nobody found the stalker, nobody really knows what happened except for what this woman experienced and the story that she told about it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to continue delivering you guys the best stories that I could possibly find. These last three I thought were super scary. I hope they entertained you. I hope I earned your subscription. If you enjoyed these, please, it helps me so much. Just hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I'm posting multiple times a week. I'm going to feed you as much stories as I could possibly find, as much stories as I could possibly tell you from personal experience. I'm going to do my best, and the best way to support me is to subscribe, like, comment your thoughts in the comments, and if you really want, buy a piece of merchandise from DougieCorrado.com or click the join button below. That helps the most. I appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you later this week.